New York Air was a low-cost American airline based in New York. The airline had a short but still good history. Let's talk about it. In September of 1980, Frank Lorenzo, the owner and founder of the airline holding company, Texas Air Corporation, announced plans to launch a low-fare airline in the Northeast United States. This is the airline which would then become known as New York Air. The carrier would be the second airline to launch following the deregulation of the US airline industry, which allowed Texas Air to freely expand its operations without government intervention. New York Air would initially compete with Eastern Airlines and its Eastern Air Shuttle service, which offered hourly service between New York's LaGuardia Airport and Boston's Logan Airport and Washington's D.C. National Airport. The way they did this was by operating a similar hourly service between the three cities and offering low fares than Eastern, and also offering advanced reservations and complimentary drinks and snacks, which Eastern did not offer. The airline then planned to expand and offer service to other cities along the East Coast. The plans were also announced for a large operation in White Plains, however this never commenced. Founding New York Air President Neil F. Meehan had been a senior manager at both Continental Airlines and at Texas International Airlines. In September of 1980, he assembled a team of airline managers, and within 90 days he had hired, trained, uniformed, and drilled New York Air's flight crew, flight attendants, dispatchers, terminal, ramp, and reservations personnel. Office and maintenance facilities in the hangar, which had originally housed American Airlines headquarters at LaGuardia in the 1930s, were thrown up rapidly, and the carrier obtained FAA certification as an adjunct to the TI certificate. New York Air commenced operation on December 19, 1980, with a flight from New York LaGuardia to Washington National. However, only 5 of the 125 seats on the aircraft were filled, and by April of 1981, New York Air had an average of 62% load factor, close to its break-even load factor of 65%, and had generated a $1.5 million loss. Executives described this as a moderate success, however subsequently raised fares on its LaGuardia flights. Following its launch, New York Air expanded and established a hub operation in LaGuardia with new service to Cleveland beginning in April of 1981, as well as smaller focus sites in Boston and Washington National. However, several planned destinations such as Dayton, Pittsburgh, and service to several destinations in upstate New York were scrapped. A LaGuardia to Detroit service was operated for a short period before being shifted to Newark, where the airline began a secondary smaller hub of operation. By July, service from LaGuardia to Cincinnati and Louisville had also begun, and by September the airline had a fleet of 13 DC-930 aircraft. Texas Air and Lorenzo's poor attitude towards labor unions led New York Air being established as a non-union company, anchoring the Airline Pilots Association, also known as ALPA, as well as staff at Texas International Airlines, also a Texas Air subsidiary, who branded New York Air as a runaway shop. A week after New York Air commenced operations, a number of Texas International employees began picketing outside LaGuardia Airport, claiming that the airline was an attempt by Texas Air to get around Texas International's union contract, and that the company was seeking to remove unionized staff by shifting operations to the non-union New York Air. Meehan denied this, stating that New York Air was a completely separate airline from Texas International, and would be prepared to negotiate contracts if its staff chose to unionize. ALPA soon began a full-scale campaign with the intention of preventing New York Air from growing as a non-union airline. In July of 1981, ALPA set up what it called a political campaign-style operation with a call center and volunteers mailing information material against the airline. Leaflets and brochures were created describing New York Air as Texas Air's Bad Apple, a play on New York's Big Apple nickname, and referring the Apple icon in the New York Air's logo, and containing bad statistics about the airline, such as its poor on-time record and reputation for overbooked flights. Badges with printed "Please Don't Fly New York Air" titles on were also produced. The materials used an edited version of the New York Air logo with a rotten apple. In August of 1981, ALPA began picketing in Boston and Washington, D.C. In what ALPA described as a desperate attempt to gain business, the airline began offering limited-time 29-cent fares, which could only be purchased in person. These promotional fares created large crowds of people seeking to purchase New York Air tickets. Images of these crowds were broadcasted by local media, who then repeated ALPA's claims and brought attention to its campaign against the airline. ALPA picketers also handed out anti-New York Air leaflets and material to those waiting to purchase promotional fares. The 1981 air traffic controllers strike badly affected New York Air's operation and its finances. The strike led to long flight delays, encouraging passengers to avoid flying. In order to ease delays, the Federal Aviation Administration reduced the number of available slots in northeastern airports, forcing airlines to cut flights. Larger airlines were able to counter this by using larger aircraft, such as Eastern's decision to operate 260-seat Airbus A300s on its shuttle flights. This meant that Eastern could still carry the same number of passengers per day despite the slot reductions, reducing the damage to its income. Due to New York Air's small fleet, it was unable to follow a similar tactic, and its shuttle service was heavily damaged by the slot restrictions. This, as well as the Eastern's larger aircraft flooding the market, led to New York Air ending its Boston service after less than a year in operation. Months after the campaign commenced, Lorenzo agreed to a new contract for Texas international pilots, however did not offer a contract to the New York Air pilots. ALPA planned to begin picketing at Newark Airport, however then began winding down the campaign in order to focus on supporting the 1981 air traffic controller strike. To maintain a presence in Boston, the airline established a hub at Logan Airport, offering service to Baltimore and Orlando. To keep the airline afloat, Texas Air provided a $10 million cash injection, and banks provided a $50 million in revolving credit. Another $15 million was obtained through the sale of 1.8 million shares. To keep the company going through winter in 1981, the airline sought another 10 to 15 million from its banks. The service out of Boston proved to be unprofitable, and the Boston hub was closed by the end of 1982. Service to Cleveland, Cincinnati and Louisville had also been cut due to competition from large airlines such as Eastern and United. In 1982 it became clear that the airline was in trouble. By the end of 1981, New York Air had lost $11 million with an additional $8.2 million lost in the first quarter of 1982. In July of 1982, Meehan resigned as president and was subsequently replaced by Michael E. Levin, who was appointed as chairman in February. Under Levin's leadership, New York Air repositioned itself as a full-service airline and began targeting business passengers with premium service, but still at fares which were typically lower than competing carriers. Levine first shrunk New York Air's network and introduced new services to another served destinations with more business demand. In August of 1982, shuttle service between LaGuardia and Boston resumed, and scheduled flights between LaGuardia and Washington National were changed so flights would leave LaGuardia on the hour rather than on the half hour. The airline also began offering complimentary bagels on morning flights, as well as wine and newspapers, allowing the shuttle to compete more effectively with Eastern. Similar shuttle service were also added from Newark, initially only to Washington National. In 1983, the airline began a small hub operation at Raleigh-Durham Airport, with connections to Greenville, Knoxville, Savannah, and later Orlando, as well as feeder service on Air Virginia and Sunbird Airlines. The carrier targeted the hub at passengers who would usually connect through larger southeastern hubs such as Atlanta or Charlotte. A private boarding lounge known as the Apple Club was offered to passengers connecting through Raleigh, reinforcing New York Air's new premium model. By the end of 1983, the airline was profitable for the first time and began ordering the larger McDonnell Douglas MD-80 aircraft to supplement its DC-9 fleet. By September of 1984, service to Boston, Greenville, Knoxville, and Orlando from Raleigh had ceased, with remaining service from Raleigh ceasing by 1985. In October of 1984, Texas Air ordered 24 Boeing 747-300 aircraft, 8 of which would be delivered to New York Air beginning in 1985. This marked the first time New York Air operated Boeing aircraft, as well as any aircraft not produced by McDonnell Douglas. In July of 1985, New York Air announced it would open a hub at Washington Dulles Airport. Construction began on a $3.6 million concourse to handle the expanded number of flights, which featured an Apple Club restaurant. By the end of 1985, New York Air had 35 flights on a day from Dulles and eventually made the airport its main operational focus. The airline also continued expanding its Boston and LaGuardia operations, with seasonal service to Martha's, Vineyard, and Nantucket. Raleigh briefly returned to New York Air's network as a connection from Washington Dulles in September of 1986. Beginning in 1986, Texas Air started coordinating the operations of all its subsidiaries. New York Air began co-sharing with other Texas Air subsidiaries, such as Continental Airlines, service into Dulles. This then led to a co-operation between Continental and New York Air, branded as the New York Air / Continental team. In January of 1987, Texas Air announced its intention to merge New York Air along with fellow subsidiaries Frontier Airlines and People Express Airlines into Continental. According to Lorenzo, the merger was necessary in order to ensure both Continental and Texas Air had the strength and size to compete in tomorrow's air travel market, and also made Continental the third largest airline in the US. New York's Air's operation ceased on February 1st, 1987, and its aircraft were subsequently repainted with the Continental's New York Air titles before gradually being repainted into the full Continental livery. Also in 1988, Texas Air sold New York Air's shuttle service to Pan Am in order to gain government approval for its planned takeover of Eastern Airlines. New York Air, under control of Continental Airlines, then shifted its LaGuardia to Boston and Washington flights to Newark. This led to the closure of New York Air's LaGuardia hub, which it had been operated at since the airline's 1980 launch. However, New York Air's Newark to Boston and Washington National shuttle was retained by Continental and operated with former New York Air Boeing 737-300s and DC-9s as a standalone operation for local passengers not connecting with other Continental flights, ironically from the former People Express North Terminal. Continental also operated the former People Express Boeing 727-200s between Newark, Boston, and Washington from Terminal B as system flights, which permitted connection to other former PE flights, now branded as CO, at the Terminal B. The Washington Dulles hub was initially retained and subsequently expanded through the acquisition of gauge from Presidential Airways, as well as taking over Dulles routes from Eastern. However, by 1989, Continental had closed the Dulles hub. Once New York's Terminal C opened, the former New York Air Shuttle flights ceased. Operation from the North Terminals were folded into the operations at Terminal C. At this point, New York Air ceased to exist. At the time of closure, New York Air had 20 McDonnell Douglas DC-930 aircraft, 12 McDonnell Douglas MD-82 aircraft, and 8 Boeing 737-300s. It's sad when airlines stop flying, but it happens from time to time. But we can still remember what happened. So yeah, thank you for watching this video. See you in the next video, hopefully. Bye.